Hey, what's in the bag? The officer barked, stepping in front of him. Malik froze. The city seemed to blur, muffled murmurs of passers-by mixing with the distant honk of a taxi. Just groceries, sir, he said, voice steady but cautious. The officer's eyes narrowed. Let me see some ID. Now. Malik complied, fingers trembling slightly as he handed over his wallet. Around them, a small crowd gathered, whispering. Phones raised. He felt every stare as a needle pricking his skin. Do you think you can just walk around here without permission? The officer snapped, tone dripping with suspicion. Malik's stomach knotted. He knew the routine, the unspoken rules, the weight of the uniform pressing down on him. I work here, sir. You can check with the restaurant. The officer laughed, a low, dangerous sound. I think I already know enough. A delivery bike skidded past, narrowly missing the officer. He flinched, grabbing Malik's arm. The crowd gasped. Malik's heart slammed against his ribs. He stared into the officer's eyes and saw something darker than authority, prejudice sharpened into a weapon. Maybe you should learn your place, the officer muttered. And then, as Malik's free hand brushed against the edge of his apron, a small golden pin caught the sunlight, a glint of something powerful, something the officer could never imagine. The officer blinked. His smirk faltered. Cliffhanger, Malik's secret, his true status, was about to turn the street into a courtroom of its own. Malik adjusted the strap of his grocery bag and stepped carefully over the cracked sidewalk. The lunch rush had already begun, and the city felt hotter than usual, even under a pale winter sun. He smelled fried onions, faint smoke from a corner food stall, and the tang of car exhaust. Footsteps approached quickly, deliberate, heavy. Hey, you there? Malik's stomach sank. He looked up. A police officer blocked the alleyway, badge gleaming in sunlight. His eyes were hard, sizing Malik up like prey. I work here, sir, Malik said, voice calm. His heart pounded in a rhythm that didn't match his words. ID now. The officer's tone was sharp, authoritative, leaving no room for debate. Malik's fingers trembled as he handed over his wallet. Around them, a few pedestrians slowed, some whispering, others filming with their phones. The weight of every gaze pressed down on him. Do you think you can just walk around here without permission? The officer snapped, his words laced with accusation. I'm heading to work, sir. You can check with the restaurant. Malik's voice was steady, but internally he calculated every risk. The officer stepped closer. His shadow loomed over Malik. Maybe you should learn your place. Malik swallowed. He had been here before, knew the unspoken rules. Keep calm, keep polite, don't fight in public, don't give them an excuse. His free hand brushed the edge of his apron. He felt the small, golden glint of a pin, the insignia of Michelin achievement he wore discreetly. The officer's gaze flicked down. A pause. A subtle shift in posture. Back up. He muttered into his radio. Malik's chest tightened. People had started to notice. Phones lifted. Cameras captured every angle. He could hear the low hum of whispers, murmurs that layered on top of the officer's growing unease. Wait, what is that? The officer stammered, eyes locking on the pin. Malik remained silent. Calm. Dignified. The world around him seemed to tilt slightly, the balance of power trembling. Footsteps echoed behind. Another officer arrived. The crowd stirred, tension thick enough to taste. Malik's mind raced. He had trained for kitchens, for awards, for moments of pressure, but never like this. Not with a uniformed figure threatening his dignity in front of strangers. The first officer's smirk faltered. Confidence drained. The golden pin caught sunlight, a tiny beacon of authority Malik held by merit, not badge. Cliffhanger, the officer realized he underestimated Malik. For the first time, he wasn't in control. And the street itself seemed to wait for what would happen next. The second officer's boots hit the pavement with a sharp rhythm. Malik stayed rooted, his grocery bag steady in one hand, the other brushing lightly over the apron. The crowd's whispers swelled, a low hum that pressed against his ears. Phones glinted in the sunlight, cameras aimed like tiny judges. Sir, the first officer stammered, voice tight now, aren't you? Malik's eyes met his, calm but alert. Yes, I am. Chef Malik Thompson. The pause was a crack in the street's tension. People stopped mid-step. Some mouths opened, then closed again. The second officer glanced at the first, confused. The first officer's hand wavered over his radio, uncertainty in his posture. Michelin, you're Michelin. The word sounded foreign, brittle. Yes, Malik said, steady. And I run several charity kitchens downtown. The staff there, many like you, sir, could use a bit of guidance. The officer's eyes flicked around, measuring the gathering crowd, the cameras, the subtle nods from bystanders. His authority, which had felt untouchable minutes ago, now seemed brittle, vulnerable. You can't, he began, then faltered. Malik tilted his head slightly, calm, dignified. I've followed the rules, sir. I've respected the law. Perhaps it's time you did the same. The tension was almost physical. The street seemed smaller, compressed by the weight of authority and truth colliding. Malik felt the adrenaline surge, not in fear, but in clarity. He could hold this space, this street, this moment. He was not invisible. The first officer's lips pressed into a thin line. His hand trembled, gripping his radio like a lifeline. We might need backup, he muttered, voice tight, eyes darting to the second officer who had stopped in mid-step. Malik's gaze shifted briefly to the crowd. Murmurs had become whispers of astonishment. A teenager with a phone whispered, "He's the chef from TV, the one everyone talks about." The officer's mouth opened again. I need to. You don't, Malik said softly, his voice calm but slicing. You need to rethink how you see people. Your assumptions, your fear, your bias, they've led you here. And now everyone can see it. The first officer's knuckles whitened on his belt. The second officer's eyes darted between Malik and the gathering crowd, searching for something solid to hold on to. But there was nothing. Malik's composure radiated, a quiet authority that no badge could erase. Step aside, the first officer muttered finally, half a command, half a plea. Malik shook his head slightly. No. Not yet. You owe this moment to everyone who's ever been judged before they opened their mouth. A bystander murmured, finally, someone standing up to him. Phones tilted higher, recording every word. The first officer swallowed. His authority had crumbled in the span of a heartbeat. The micro-twist hit like a pulse through the street. The officer's backup arrived, uniformed, alert, but hesitant. They'd been briefed on a routine street stop, but the real scene defied expectation. Malik, calm and unshakable, faced 4 officers alone. And in that moment, the street itself felt aligned with him. You can't do this here, the first officer said, voice cracking under the weight of exposure. Malik's eyes didn't leave his. I'm not doing anything illegal. You are. The crowd leaned forward, caught between awe and fear, their whispers growing. Malik felt the energy, the shift. Power wasn't in the badge, he realized, it was in truth, composure, and resilience. The officer's hand drifted to his radio again, then hesitated. Every second stretched. Phones tilted closer, eyes fixed, moral authority silently judging. Cliffhanger, Malik's quiet, golden pin, the emblem of achievement no one had suspected, glinted in the sun. For the first time, the officer saw it not just as a decoration, but as a statement. The next move would decide everything. Malik stepped back onto the street, his grocery bag swinging lightly by his side. The sun reflected off the officer's polished boots, and the tension in the air was almost audible. The second officer had arrived, eyes scanning the crowd, uncertainty written across his face. The first officer's hand hovered near his belt, half a threat, half a plea. Step aside, the first officer barked, trying to reclaim authority. I don't think so, Malik said calmly, his voice low but firm. You've already shown your assumptions. Now it's time to face the truth. The officers exchanged glances. The first officer's face reddened, frustration seeping through the cracks in his composure. The crowd around them murmured, some filming, others whispering encouragement. Phones tilted like silent witnesses. You don't understand who you're talking to, the first officer said, voice rising, trying to intimidate. Malik's eyes remained steady, scanning the officers, the crowd, and the street. I understand perfectly. And you will too, if you keep your focus on facts instead of fear. The micro-twist hit. A bystander stepped forward, a young woman holding a phone, her voice clear. Sir, maybe you should think twice. Everyone's watching. The officer's jaw tightened. He took a step closer to Malik, leaning aggressively, trying to impose power. I can have you arrested right here. Malik raised a hand slightly, not in fear but as a boundary. You can, but it won't make you right. And everyone here knows it. The crowd's energy shifted. Whispered murmurs grew louder, more confident. Phones recorded every second, capturing authority clashing with dignity. The balance of power had begun to tilt. "You think your status protects you?" the first officer snapped. His hand twitched near his radio. "I've earned respect through work, skill, and integrity," Malik replied. "Something you might consider before judging someone based on appearance." The tension escalated. The second officer took a tentative step forward, unsure whether to support his partner or follow Malik's calm. The crowd leaned in, sensing the brewing conflict. A store manager from nearby emerged, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and apron, shaking his head. "Officers, please. You're escalating unnecessarily," he said, voice firm. His presence added weight to Malik's side without a single word of threat. The first officer's eyes darted, confusion and frustration warring with pride. His body stiffened, shoulders squared, voice lowering. "You think I don't know my place?" "You clearly don't know mine," Malik said, his tone soft but sharp. "And that's why this is happening in front of witnesses." The officer hesitated, realizing the street itself had turned against him. Each word Malik spoke carried gravity, each pause reinforced authority grounded not in uniform but in truth. The bystanders watched, captivated. Even the hesitant second officer felt the shift, his posture loosening slightly. Malik's internal narrative reflected the stakes. Stay composed. Don't react. Let them see the truth. The law is on your side, but dignity must lead. The first officer's hand drifted back toward the radio, but he faltered. "Should I call back up?" he thought, aware that each second stretched longer under scrutiny. The crowd sensed it. Phones rose higher. Cameras focused. Every misstep would be permanent. "You're testing your limits," the officer said, voice cracking slightly, trying to regain control. "I'm simply standing," Malik replied. "Standing while you expose bias, fear, and misplaced authority." A micro-twist appeared. The golden Michelin pin on Malik's apron reflected the sun directly into the first officer's eyes. It was small, subtle, yet impossible to ignore. Prestige, skill, accomplishment, an invisible shield of earned respect now visible to everyone. The officer stumbled slightly, blinking rapidly. The crowd noticed. Phones clicked and whirred. Murmurs grew into low, incredulous laughter. The balance of power shifted visibly, imperceptible to most but undeniable to the officers. You can't," the officer stammered, words failing him under the weight of public scrutiny. Malik's gaze held him. Calm, unwavering. "I don't need to. You already have." The crowd tightened its circle, phones recording, whispers of admiration rising. Even nearby shopkeepers leaned out their doors, watching the unraveling authority. Malik's composure radiated, unshakable under threat. Cliffhanger, the first officer's pride, his uniformed power, was cracking publicly. Backup had arrived, but the street's momentum had already shifted. Every second now counted, and Malik's next move, or silence, would determine how far the collapse of false authority would go. Phones clicked and hummed, capturing every 10-second. Malik stood in the middle of the street, grocery bag swinging lightly, apron crisp, golden pin catching sunlight. Bystanders leaned in, murmuring in low, incredulous tones. The officers shifted uncomfortably, aware that every gesture was being recorded. You can't just stand there like that," the first officer sputtered, face flushed. Malik's voice was calm, precise. "I'm not breaking the law. You're just uncomfortable being exposed." A teenager in the crowd whispered into her phone, "This is going viral." "Is the chef Michelin starred, remember?" The first officer's hand trembled near his belt. He glanced at his backup, whose expression wavered between obedience and doubt. "Move aside," the officer barked. "I don't move for prejudice," Malik replied. "And the crowd agrees." A micro-twist, a delivery driver stopped his bike, watching, then gestured toward the gathering. More people slowed, some filming, some whispering. The street was alive with attention. "You're going to regret this," the officer muttered, voice low, edged with panic. Malik tilted his head slightly, unwavering. "Regret what? Standing with dignity? Being calm under pressure? Or revealing the truth?" The crowd leaned closer. Murmurs swelled into whispers of outrage. A store manager from a nearby shop stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Officers, please. There's no reason to escalate further. Step back." The officer's eyes flicked to the manager, then the phones, then back to Malik. Pride and authority collided with exposure and shame. He wanted to act. He wanted control. But every move was under the lens of public scrutiny. Malik's internal thoughts were precise, calm. "Do not react. Let them see the truth. Silence is a tool as much as words. Another bystander, a middle-aged woman with a phone, whispered loudly, "Look at him. He's standing there, calm. The officer is losing it." The officer's jaw clenched. I can't have this," he said, voice cracking. He reached for his radio, hands shaking slightly. The second officer hesitated beside him, unsure. Malik's gaze didn't waver. His golden pin glinted, a symbol of skill, achievement, and earned respect that no uniform could challenge. The crowd noticed. Phones raised higher. Murmurs grew into whispers of admiration, some nodding, some whispering encouragement. "You're finished," the officer muttered under his breath. "I don't need to finish anything," Malik replied softly. "You already have." The first officer stumbled backward slightly, reality hitting him. The world had shifted. Authority based on fear and prejudice was crumbling in real time. Every bystander, every recording device, every whisper contributed to the exposure. The crowd pressed closer, phones clicking, filming, witnessing. The energy was palpable, a tide turning against the abuse of power. Malik's composure radiated through the throng. Every subtle movement and calm word reinforced moral authority. A micro-twist, a local journalist, notebook in hand, emerged from the crowd. She nodded at Malik, then addressed the officers. "This is being recorded, live. Any further aggression will be public knowledge immediately." The first officer's eyes flicked from the crowd to the journalist to the golden pin again. Panic threaded through his posture. He realized that the narrative was no longer his to control. Malik's internal narrative reflected clarity and patience. Every second counts. Dignity is more powerful than aggression. Silence is louder than threats. "You've made a scene," the first officer said finally, his voice tight and brittle. "Only the truth has made a scene," Malik replied. The street seemed to lean in, collectively absorbing the weight of his words. Phones clicked, whispers rose, and the bystanders leaned forward, witnesses to authority undone. Cliffhanger, the officer's uniformed control had collapsed publicly, exposed to cameras, witnesses, and history. Malik's quiet, earned authority radiated from a simple pin, a symbol of excellence and dignity. The next move would determine whether justice continued or if the officer would attempt to reclaim power, and fail under the public eye. The street felt smaller now, compressed by the weight of every gaze, every camera lens, and every whisper. Malik remained at the center, calm and upright, his apron slightly swaying as his grocery bag rested lightly in one hand. Around him, the crowd's murmurs had grown, some incredulous, some quietly supportive, but the officers' faces told the real story. The first officer leaned against the side of a parked car, his chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. His uniform, once a symbol of absolute authority, now felt like a heavy shroud. The badge on his chest seemed almost comical under the sun, reflecting glints of light that only amplified his discomfort. He stared at Malik's golden pin, the small insignia that had been a silent declaration of mastery, achievement, and earned respect. For the first time in his career, the officer felt stripped of power, exposed for more than just an infraction, exposed for bias, for assumption, for the arrogance that comes with unearned authority. The second officer hovered slightly behind, unsure where to position himself, a mirror of internal conflict. He had been trained to follow, to support, to enforce. And yet now, with a Michelin-starred chef standing calmly amidst a crowd of witnesses, he felt the subtle inversion of power. Every instinct told him to side with his partner, to reassert control. But the reality before him was undeniable. Authority based on fear and prejudice was faltering in real time. The first officer muttered under his breath, voice tight and brittle, How did I not see this before?" Malik's gaze did not waver. Calm, poised, and unwavering, he sensed the tremor beneath the officer's composure. "What you see," Malik said softly, his words carrying weight, "is the consequence of assuming someone's place before knowing their worth." The officer flinched at the truth in that sentence. He wanted to respond with authority, with a command, with the rigid power of uniform. But every movement, every word, was now under scrutiny, recorded, judged, and archived in memory. Phones hovered, cameras clicked. The crowd leaned closer, drawn into the tension. A micro-twist, a middle-aged man from a nearby store emerged, apron slightly wrinkled, holding a clipboard. "Officers," he said firmly, voice cutting through the tension, "please. There's no reason to escalate further. You've already made your point. Step back." The first officer's jaw tightened, and he took a step back, as if physically reminded of his vulnerability. Pride and authority warred within him, colliding with the reality of exposure. He glanced at the second officer, who hesitated, unsure whether to step forward or remain passive. Malik's internal narrative ran quietly but powerfully. This is not fear. This is clarity. Do not react. Let truth guide every move. Silence can be louder than threats. The first officer's hand drifted toward his radio, fingers brushing the buttons almost instinctively. But he froze. The phone's recording, the crowd watching, the journalist taking notes, all of it created an invisible cage around his actions. He realized any reaction now would only magnify his misjudgment. "Sir," Malik said, voice calm but sharp, "the only power you hold here is the power you choose to wield responsibly. Everything else is a shadow." The officer's eyes flicked nervously across the street, then back to the golden pin glinting on Malik's apron. For a moment, he saw it not as decoration, but as a symbol of earned authority, the kind no uniform could grant, no badge could enforce. He swallowed, the words stuck in his throat. Another micro-twist. The teenager filming whispered loudly, "He's not afraid." His calm, the officer's losing it. Phones clicked in agreement, recording every second. The power shift was subtle but undeniable. Even the crowd felt it, the shift of tension from force to moral weight. The first officer muttered, almost inaudibly, I've made mistakes. His voice trailed, uncertain, faltering under the gravity of exposure. The second officer's stance softened slightly, awareness dawning that authority without fairness was fragile. Malik's voice, calm and deliberate, broke through. "Admitting it is the first step. Your fear doesn't erase the harm, but your acknowledgement can begin repair." The officer flinched, a flash of shame passing across his features. He realized the street had become a courtroom, and he was the accused, judged by cameras, bystanders, and conscience alike. Every gesture, every tone, every reaction would be remembered. The crowd leaned forward. Phones clicked. Even the journalist, notebook in hand, lifted a camera. The weight of collective attention pressed down. The officer's internal reckoning was not just personal, it was institutional. The realization hit. Bias and misuse of power left visible marks, and in the digital age, nothing went unseen. Malik's thoughts were clear: stay composed. Let them see truth. Let them see exposure. Dignity is more powerful than aggression. He adjusted the strap of his apron, the small golden pin catching sunlight, a beacon of earned respect. "You can step back now," Malik said, voice calm but carrying authority. "Or continue to demonstrate what bias looks like to the world." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. His shoulders slumped. Pride, once rigid, was bending under scrutiny. He wanted to argue, to reclaim control, to assert power. But the presence of witnesses, phones, and moral clarity rendered any action futile. A micro-twist, the officer finally lowered his hand from the radio. The second officer relaxed beside him. The street was silent for a heartbeat, a collective exhale. Exposure had done what confrontation could not. Malik's gaze swept over the crowd. Respect and attention were evident in their faces, subtle nods, quiet murmurs of support. Authority without fairness was crumbling. Power grounded in skill, dignity, and truth radiated from him. Cliffhanger, the first officer's internal reckoning was far from over. Guilt, shame, and public exposure pressed on him like weights. The next choice, apology or denial, would determine not just his career, but his place in a system suddenly visible to everyone. Malik's golden pin reflected sunlight one last time, a reminder that earned mastery would always outshine inherited power. The first officer's shoulders slumped under the weight of scrutiny. The crowd had thickened, phones raised like witnesses in a courtroom, and the second officer lingered nearby, uncertain. Every gesture of authority the first officer attempted now felt hollow, weak against the reality of exposure. I want to apologize," the officer said finally, voice low, almost breaking. He glanced at the crowd, then back to Malik, who stood calm, hands at his sides, golden pin catching the sun. Malik studied him silently. Apology without sincerity meant nothing. "Do you understand why this moment exists?" he asked quietly, eyes locked. The officer struggled. "I was wrong. I judged. Yes," Malik said, interrupting gently. "You assumed your power gave you clarity, but it only gave you blindness. Apologies are meaningless without understanding." The crowd murmured in quiet approval. Even the bystanders seemed to lean in, drawn into the moral confrontation unfolding in the street. Phones continued to record, capturing every pause, every subtle inflection of voice. The micro-twist hit. The second officer stepped forward, voice hesitant. "Sir, maybe we need to review how we handle stops. This isn't right." The first officer flinched at the implicit rebuke, realizing he was not only exposed publicly, but internally judged by his own partner. His authority felt fractured, unstable. Malik's internal narrative remained composed. Let them face the consequences of their assumptions. Maintain dignity. Speak truth softly, but firmly. "You have a choice," Malik continued. "You can acknowledge your bias and make it right, or you can cling to pride and continue to fail publicly." The officer's hands twitched near his belt. Every instinct screamed for control, yet the street itself denied it. Phones clicked, whispers rose, and the golden pin on Malik's apron reflected light into the officer's eyes, a reminder that mastery earned, not assumed, carries authority stronger than any badge. A bystander whispered into her phone, his standing calm, the officer's completely unraveling. Phones tilted, capturing every detail. The street had become a stage of justice, powered by truth and observation. I see now," the officer muttered finally, voice trembling. I should never have assumed. I let bias take control. I apologize, truly." Malik nodded once, calmly, but not without weight. Acknowledgement is the first step. Action must follow. Make sure your conduct matches your words. The first officer's jaw clenched. Pride warred with shame. Yet under the gaze of the crowd, under the silent judgment of the bystanders, he could see no escape in denial. Every lie, every act of authority abused, had been documented. The golden pin gleamed, not just for Malik, but as a symbol of earned respect, discipline, and resilience. Another micro-twist, the local journalist, who had been recording quietly, stepped forward. "This is going live. Any further aggression, or insincerity in apology, will be public knowledge." The officer's face went pale. The reality of accountability, both social and institutional, pressed on him. The second officer nodded in agreement, recognizing the systemic implications of what had occurred. Malik's thoughts were precise. Dignity holds more power than fear. Truth outshines authority grounded in prejudice. Witnesses are allies when justice is visible. "Do you understand the harm you've caused?" Malik asked, voice soft but cutting. Yes," the officer said, almost whispering. "I understand. I will do better." The crowd murmured, a quiet wave of acknowledgement. The street, once a stage of tension, now felt aligned with justice. Phones continued to record, capturing the moral victory and the visible internal reckoning of authority. Malik's stance remained firm, calm. The golden pin reflected light again, glinting in the sun, a reminder of what was earned, what mattered, and what authority should be based upon: skill, respect, and integrity. A micro-twist. One bystander stepped forward, applauding quietly. Another nodded in agreement. Even the store manager relaxed, seeing public accountability take root. The first officer, chest rising and falling, finally lowered his gaze. The acknowledgement was there. The exposure complete. Public, institutional, moral, the three forces converged. Cliffhanger. As Malik turned to leave, the officer whispered under his breath, almost to himself, I need to change. I have to, or I'll lose everything." Malik's golden pin caught the sunlight once more, a silent statement. Mastery, integrity, and dignity endure beyond the badge. The street was alive with moral clarity, and the officer's next steps would determine if redemption was possible or if institutional consequences were inevitable. Malik returned to the kitchen, the faint hum of appliances welcoming him like old friends. The street confrontation felt both distant and vivid, etched into his mind with every flicker of light from the golden pin on his apron. Phones had recorded everything. Witnesses had seen. The officers had faced exposure and acknowledgement. The city, in its subtle, observant way, had shifted. Tasha approached, eyes bright, clipboard tucked under her arm. "Chef Malik, that was incredible." They were powerless. "You didn't raise your voice, and yet, everyone listened." Malik offered a small, calm smile. "It wasn't about power, Tasha. It was about dignity. Respect earned through skill, not fear. That's the only authority that lasts." The staff gathered, whispers turning into quiet applause. Some nodded toward him, some lifted phones to continue capturing his calm demeanor. Each gaze reflected awe, validation, and relief. He felt the weight of responsibility, the emotional toll of the public encounter, and yet a quiet pride. The street outside had changed too. News coverage was already circulating, highlighting the officer's mishandling, bias, and public humiliation. Social media amplified Malik's presence, not as a victim, but as a figure of resilience, skill, and moral clarity. The golden pin, once a symbol of personal achievement, had become a beacon of justice, subtle but undeniable. A micro-twist: the first officer had been called in for internal review. His pride and authority were fractured, his actions documented. Accountability had arrived, not through violence, but through public witness and moral clarity. Even the second officer was being questioned about adherence to protocol and awareness of bias. Malik's internal narrative remained composed, reflective. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it glimmers quietly, through composure, through truth, through action guided by skill and integrity. He adjusted his apron, feeling the familiar weight of the golden pin. It was a reminder that earned mastery transcends intimidation, prejudice, or fear. A journalist entered the kitchen, notebook in hand. "Chef Malik, may we get a statement?" Malik nodded, calm and measured. The street was a test of integrity. Authority can intimidate, but only skill and dignity withstand scrutiny. Bias and assumption crumble under observation, and accountability is inevitable if the truth is visible. The journalist nodded, scribbling quickly. Malik's words were concise, clear, and resonant. They captured the essence of what had happened: exposure, humility, and moral authority triumphing over institutional abuse. Outside, bystanders discussed the incident, phones in hand, capturing both his calm stance and the officer's faltering authority. The golden pin glinted once more in the sunlight, almost as if affirming Malik's quiet victory. The staff began to resume work, though the energy in the kitchen had shifted. Whispered conversations lingered, a mix of awe, admiration, and relief. Malik moved between stations, checking on preparations, tasting sauces, adjusting seasoning. The physical act of creating, of cooking, grounded him after the psychological storm of the street confrontation. Another micro-twist: one of the restaurant's regulars, a local council member, stepped in briefly. "I saw the coverage," she said, voice steady. "The officer's behavior is being reviewed. Your composure set a new standard. The community recognizes your resilience." Malik's response was calm, almost meditative. "It's not about recognition. It's about setting a standard for fairness, integrity, and respect. And making sure those in positions of authority are accountable." The emotional beats were subtle but powerful. Relief mingled with residual tension, pride with trauma. Malik's composure had been tested publicly, yet he had emerged not only unshaken but morally victorious. A final micro-twist: the first officer issued a written apology through official channels. Internal investigations were underway. The second officer, reflecting on his own role, committed to bias training. The ripple of accountability extended beyond the street, into the system, into behavior, into awareness. Malik returned to plating dishes, the aroma of fresh herbs and seared meat filling the kitchen. Tasha smiled at him. "You handled it perfectly." Malik nodded once, quietly. "We handled it. Together. This is what leadership looks like, not through intimidation, but through integrity, composure, and visibility." The golden pin on his apron caught the final rays of sunlight filtering through the kitchen windows. It was more than a symbol of culinary achievement now. It was a symbol of moral clarity, resilience, and the subtle, unyielding power of truth. Cliffhanger: the city moved on, but the lesson lingered. Authority wielded without fairness leaves traces visible to all. Malik's calm, his skill, and his quiet dignity had reshaped not just a street, but a system. And while the emotional cost remained, an indelible mark of trauma and resilience, the victory was real, bittersweet, and enduring.